All right, teachers, this one is for you. So I have everyone start laying down so that the back can be totally flat and you can figure out what your baseline is for what your spine looks like. And moving the arms from that overhead position into a wide out T or cactus position gets your shoulder blades to retract down the back, and you can figure out how that affects your low spine. So if the low spine is really curving up here, you'll have them step their feet to the floor and knees point up to the ceiling. That's a softer angle. Otherwise, you can have them work with this shoulder retraction as they cactus the arms. And eventually that works into engaging the core. We work with the palms and the elbows pressing in, and I usually cue this as the elbows to touch before the hands because that engages the chest line without engaging the neck as much. Once that's okay, then you tap it in. And if that wasn't okay to start, you wouldn't go on to this. You do want to pull the belly down toward the spine instead of pushing it out and up. That's a common mistake for core engagement. And again, we move into the eagle wrap. And if the eagle wrap doesn't work, you can stick with that elbows touching business. Or you could tap the hands to the top of the shoulders, which is the general modification for eagle arms. Either way is fine. I really want the core engaged more than the shoulder wrap at this point. And then we pull this in and bring it face down. And you start to loosen up the spine here. Regular cat-cows, you can move it to the sides. This is a general warm-up because you might have picked up something that kinked the back side of the line. And I usually go to the sides. It feels good in my spine. That doesn't always work for everybody. And then the knees hug up. And that's why the core was engaged before this happened. It's difficult to pull this in the right way without just taxing out the fronts of the thighs. And then we move into down dog, which is kind of your home base. And I have them do this as a short one to start because otherwise that reach across really doesn't work. You make this as short as you want to. The higher up you are to the hip, the easier this is. The lower down toward the foot, the harder it is. But again, this is that torso rotation warm up. This is sort of the first time it's happening in the sequence, and it happens a lot in the sequence. And then you can widen it out. And we take the knee up and out. I like to open the hip before anything else. And then you tap it. And again, you're going wide to the side. There's a lot of hip work in this sequence. And we start to loosen it up by going wide to the side to start. It doesn't have to touch. The back knee can be down. But eventually we move it into Malasana squat. And this isn't always a comfortable place for people. When I teach this sequence in classes, I have them grab a block or two. You can have them set the block underneath their hips for a softer version of this. And that reach forward also brings the hip flexor a little bit deeper into the crease. And then forward folds, just in general, I like to pause for a little bit longer in a forward fold than you even see here. And again, this is the first time I've done the video on YouTube, so the cutoff of my head was a mistake. I will get better at this. But you can see the torso rotation even here. We're taking it wide in that cactus shape to the side. Hip bones stay forward, and that's a common theme here. A lot of the sequencing is building on itself. Technically, it's a ladder flow. So you do the same pieces over as you add more things to it. And this is the first piece of that wide to the side twist. And then again with the eagle arms. And again, when I've taught it in class, I do the left underneath the right for the whole time. When I videoed it, that sort of got jumbled up. It really doesn't matter. There is something to be said for switching it around. And we do that a few times with the forward fold. And again, we've now worked with shoulder retraction, and we're working with shoulder protraction with the eagle arms. And you step back with the opposite foot just to get in the habit of kind of working your way backwards. And this is the first plank. I have them hold it for a few breaths and then bring it down to the floor. No, I never teach an upward facing dog before I've taught a cobra, and I usually teach a few cobras. Before we get there, it doesn't feel good in my body to jump up into that back bend, especially in this sequence. We're putting two very opposite movements together, and you want a gentle warm up with the spine. Back to child's pose and back to down dog, which is, again, your home base. And then we start the second side. You roll the hip open, the knee to the same elbow, and you start to work the hip open more and more and more. And eventually you step that through. Back to the Malasana squat. And again, it might be a little easier the second time through. Again, that block is available if you need it. And the hands may never come off the floor, but this time through, again, we're adding pieces to this, reaching away from the floor instead of down to the floor. That hip crease is starting to be open, so that's a little bit more manageable here as well. And then you take it in a fold, because now we're working into the hamstrings as well as the hip crease. And come up and you take the eagle wrap and into the fold again, and that starts to get easier. The shoulders start to open, that retraction to protraction business gets a little bit more natural in the body. Then you step it back to the plank pose, and we take a couple rounds of push-ups here. That core is already engaged, starting to engage the upper body. Before the shoulders get too loose, you want to get them engaged and moving around. And then again, we take another cobra sequence. This time we're going wide to the side to get the front side of the shoulder loosened up in order to do those wraps that we'll do later. And this is also a little bit of torso rotation, as we've already seen. Just going a little bit further and forcing the hip bones to be squared toward the floor. You don't have to take that push-up. You take it back to child's pose as you did before, but that again starts to get things engaged even while they're loosening up. And then we build on what we did before. Keep the back knee lifted, and we pulse this back to loosen up the hamstrings. There's a weird thing that happens with dancer pose where you have to be really loose on the front side and really engaged on the back side. But if you're too engaged through the hamstrings, the glutes won't engage, which is what we're trying to get to here. So again, you see that torso rotation, open, and then swing it through, because now your hamstrings are loose enough to support that transition. Moving into the sides, and then we slowly and carefully bring this away from the floor. And this is where that hamstring contraction comes into play, and it's a higher up one because your legs are so wide, which gets underneath the glutes, which is where we want it to be for dancer. And then out to warrior two to the back. We're doing back before front. It's okay. You've bent your knees wide to both sides already. And then down to a side angle. Chest stays open. You start to work the shoulder rotation. The whole shoulder girdle loosens up. But again, you're solid through the low body. And you swing this through to the front. You hug the foot up, so that inner thigh contraction is what lifts the foot up. The inner thigh contraction, the upper inner thigh, that's what squeezes in your eagle pose. And again, now you're kind of working it toward the top of the mat into a chair pose. And chair pose is what you would go to if eagle wasn't working, right? You don't have to sweep one leg over the other. We start to do the rotation here. Retraction through the shoulder blades. Rotation through the torso. Hip bones stay squared toward the front, which is true in really both poses. And then we take this toward the back of the mat, working toward that chaturanga, and you might take a full one here, because now you're pretty ready for that. And we take it to the other side. So again, you're seeing these pieces sort of repeat and show up in different ways. The main tenets, the component parts, repeat a bunch. Press the hip back to get that chest to open. And that's something you'll see in a lot of my sequencing. As you bend the knee, then you sweep it through. And that softens that transition a little bit too and lessens the chance of kind of pulling out of the hamstrings. And we lift up toward that goddess pose. The wide knees, the hugged up upper inner thigh gets you to stand tall. And then that strong warrior two in the legs, and you keep it kind of all the way through here. You're holding those warrior two legs a lot, even in your side angle, even while you sweep the arm, even really as you sweep it through. And then you take that foot hug up at the top of the mat. And if you think of it as a prep for eagle, it kind of helps the cueing as well. And you bring it to the top of the mat and you work it into chair pose where both hips are square. You essentially have the same eagle legs, just with both feet on the floor. And the further you sit back, the more you can engage through the glutes because you're resting in the heel of your foot. And you certainly don't have to tap the elbows to the knees, but the lower you get, the more likely it is you can pull the belly up and in, and that's an important cue. And you work it back, and you work it into chaturanga. So now we've done a couple chaturangas, now we're fairly ready for that full sun A, which is what we head to next. And I give them a chance to kind of do that on their own in this next section. It's a nice way for people to feel into their body. If you do let them do it on their own, that can be really overwhelming for people. So if you'd rather continue to cue that, continue to cue it. But make sure it's at a pace that works for everybody in the room. And again, not the best hop I've ever done. But it's my first video, guys. Cut me some slack. Linking this part with the breath is really the best piece for what comes next. If you can keep the breath moving, then you can pile these next few things on top of it and you don't lose the whole thing. And then if they did lose the breath while they went faster, you get it back by bringing them down. All right, so now we move into sort of the meat of this. Leg up, leg to the outside, step to the outside. You've done this before, right? Pulse it back, thumb to the hip crease, roll it open, swing it through. Lift it up. We've done this part before. Warrior two to the back, and then we start to change it up. Bring it up, bring it down, and then bring it back up to reverse triangle. So now you get out of those bent legs, but it's the same thing. You want to put more weight in your feet than in your bottom hand. So it's a higher upswing. It's a harder one to do than with the bent leg. And then you take it through over to side angle. So you're opening instead of keeping it closed. And that's a natural progression, to Kunjunasana. You certainly don't have to take that, but it's nice to see how the pieces kind of add back together. And then we move this into Warrior One. You are ready for Warrior One now because the front of the back hip flexor is open enough to support both feet on the ground. We add these eagle arms in. And that humble warrior is an important piece for if you want to tap down into your full eagle. You have a little bit wider of a base of support with both feet split here. And then again, you shift it into standing split, and that gets the glute more engaged than the bottom of the hamstring, which is where we tend to pull in the standing split. And then you take it up to one leg Urdhva Hastasana, and you push back. So that push back is actually really important. Pushing the foot back into that lunge is the same way you push the foot out in a dancer pose. And then we take this to the other side. So again, you have these familiar pieces that you're building on. You're continuing to loosen up the hip flexors, continuing to work the shoulder open and hug up through the upper inner thigh. And then once we've done these repeat pieces, then we build and add on with these other pieces that we're now ready for, like the straight leg reverse triangle that you see here. You're away from the ground higher. That's what makes this more difficult, because you really have to press through the feet in order to not sink through the hip while you're moving that arm around, because generally that open arm acts as a little bit of support. You can bring it through to your side angle facing the front. So now we've opened the chest. We go right into the balance or that foot hug, which is the same piece of it, that step before. And the warrior two, again, that your back leg is now ready for. And I usually cue that as the back inner thigh pressing to the back of the room. And that helps with where we're headed as well. So as you dip it down, the shoulder protraction there is split apart of the shoulder blades. And it stays apart even as you shift forward. As you release the hands, then the shoulders retract a little bit down the back, and you can get a little bit further into this. So again, you look at that one leg piece here. You bring it up. That push back is almost like a pre-dancer, and step back to the lunge. And those chaturangas are just kind of keeping your breath moving, keeping your body moving. If it becomes too much to add that in, then that's the first piece that goes. All right, so now we start to take it down a little bit here. Working into a lizard pose here not only gives students a break from moving, but it really works the hip open. And that open hip flexor on the back leg is what's going to make your dancer a lot more accessible. And it's what will make your eagle less of a compression. And then here we put that hip flexor and that shoulder openness together. And like I said in the student video, you can keep the thumb in the hip crease. It's the same thing. You certainly don't have to grab for the foot. My foot sickles really badly, and you can see that in this clip here. It doesn't hurt my foot to do that. It just overextends. I wanted to mention it because generally you would want to flex the foot there. All right, so in Skandasana, but you want some bounce here, which is what kind of expression I'm making with my face, because you want to be able to get out of this. That spring out is that deep inner upper thigh contraction. That's what squeezes in your eagle. You bring it down and you bring it back. And we take this on the other side. There's a little bit of explosive work to do, but mostly we're kind of taking this down a notch to get more into a stretch and some strengthening without as much flowing, so that you can conserve your energy, make sure your breath is solid for the full transition, which is what we head into after this piece. And again, you start with the thumb in the hip crease. You might then reach back for the foot. Either way, it's that chest open and then the chest closed. So these are the things that you're doing, right? Dancer, eagle, dancer, eagle, without the shoulder protraction, because you're in retraction the whole time here. And then you bring it through, and then we won't work on the leg aspect. You're going from this split like you would in dancer, not the same rotation, but out into that engagement, that squeeze of the upper inner thigh like you would in eagle. You take it up, you take it down, you take it back. And again, bonus chaturanga. And then down to the floor, and we work with the shoulder stretch. So again, we're taking it down a notch here. And again, I haven't mentioned this yet, but when I teach this, that shoulder stretch goes on each side. Somehow when I was recording it, I didn't do it the same way as I've been teaching it. But I do this shoulder after the first side from that spring out from Skandasana. And I do this second shoulder that you see here after the second side that we just did. You can do it either way. There's something to be said for doing both at once. There's something to be said for breaking it up. This whole section is that stretch and strengthen, sort of take it down in pace. And that supports the grab of the foot in your dancer. If that's the part that's kind of holding you back, that stretch out really gets it involved. All right, so here we are. We're at the peak transition piece. When I teach a longer than 60-minute class, like a 75 or a 90-minute, I do a full eagle before I come at it from this angle. But in a 60-minute class, you are warmed up for this transition from warrior one straight into your full eagle. If you don't feel comfortable teaching full eagle as a transition first, as opposed to just stepping into it, then by all means, do a full eagle first. One leg of Hastasana, so we take it in pieces. And that same pushback that you did into a lunge, now you're taking it into a dance where you grab the foot, which is the same thing you did on the floor when you grab the back foot in that kneeling lunge. And the reason that I tell them to not maybe take the biggest one they've ever taken is this transition right here. This is actually the secret peak, is to get into that bound standing split and then let the foot go, possibly take a handstand hop. That's really kind of what we're working on more than anything else here. And it's a secret snuck in piece. And then we take the other side. So warrior one, it's almost like you're coming to humble warrior, but instead of leaning forward and down, you launch up and bring it over. And if you think of it as three separate poses, right? Warrior one to one leg Urdhva Hastasana to eagle, then it's a little bit more manageable because you're taking it in pieces, which is the goal of anything that I teach, yeah? And then if you get out of it in pieces, then you can think of it in steps as well. One leg Urdhva Hastasana. As you push back, then you grab the foot. So again, the foot grab doesn't actually have to happen. You don't actually have to have the foot to do all of this. This is where you'll see a lot of people kind of lose it and stomp around the mat. If you can encourage them to get back in, that's why we don't take maybe the biggest one that we take here. And then into that standing split. Possibly take a hop, skip it. Maybe you're exhausted. You go back to down dog. And we do the same thing, but we do it in reverse. So I take them to the top of the mat to get into dancer from a standing position. And that's where all that standing work at the very beginning comes in. You take that cactus arm, that squeeze down with the hands down is the same rotation you start to need to kick the foot up and catch it. And so retraction in the shoulders and an external rotation in the arms. And you hug the foot up and you get it. And again, not the biggest one you've taken, right? Because you have to get out of it. And this is more about getting from one thing to the next than it is getting really big here. So the upper inner thigh squeezes up and in to get that foot back up into the next piece. That is that standing one leg. And then you wrap it all under and through. The tendency in the eagle is to squeeze through the bottom of the hamstring. If you get that upper inner thigh engagement, that becomes a little bit easier. All right, so then this last little push, again, kind of like a secret little push at the end. Your outer and inner thigh are so engaged here that you can kick that foot out, sweep it up, and press it up. and you'll get higher in your standing split than you would normally. That's because the glute is engaged in a different place than it can normally get to, because these two poses use a similar part. That's the common thread between your dancer and your eagle, is the medial glute. So again, you get it here. Outer hip on the standing leg hugs in. Inner upper thigh of the kicked leg hugs up and in. Those are the pieces you need for that weird little kick out thing. And take it in pieces. You bring it in. And then we unwind that straight leg position, and you fold it down. And right here, you'll feel it, right? You kind of want to loosen it up. You kind of want to kick it out. You know how engaged that hip and the underside of your glute and the outer side of your glute. And then you kick and swing and press up. And you can kind of capitalize on all of that contraction that you've done. And that's really it. We kind of wiggle out of this and we start to take it down a piece and step it back and into half pigeon. And I like to step it back to half pigeon in this sequence as opposed to kicking from your down dog, because you've done a lot of hip open work. So that kick from down dog doesn't really work to cross it under as much. But the step back and wing out with the knee, you've already done a few times. And before we go to the other side, we kind of loosen up through the outer hips. That's the part that I was just talking about is so engaged and so contracted. So you really do have to counter and stretch it out. And for me, if I find that spot against the floor, I can really kind of dig in. That may resonate for your students. It may not, but swinging the knees back and forth will definitely loosen things up no matter what. And then again, you dip out and sit back into that half pigeon. If you wanted to add a mermaid or kind of hugging that back foot in, you're certainly warmed up for it. It certainly fits in this sequence. There isn't really a reason for me to do it in the sequence for what I was headed toward. The shoulders are about as open as they're going to get. I want to head into that reverse plank position that you'll see in a second. And I'd rather do that than stretch the shoulder out anymore. So again, you take the back leg forward, you switch it back and forth. You might find that spot in the very center of the hip and settle into it. But again, if that doesn't work for your students, if they're not feeling any sensation there, then you continue to switch the knees and they can get wider and wider to the sides. And then you extend the legs out. You're kind of resetting things through the middle to take this fold here. All right, so now we head into that reverse plank. You've got an open chest. You've got that downward rotation in your shoulder blades. And you've got kind of the foot engagement also. And this works as a more gentle or passive back bend than you've been doing those standing poses, but it is a lot of work. So you could take a reverse tabletop instead, if that seems more manageable. And then back to that fold. You just did a back bend, now you're doing a fold as a transition, and we'll do a little bit of twisting to fully counter that. And so you bring it down to the back. And again, that twisting by swinging your knees back and forth starts to loosen up, not just the outer hips here, but now that your back is on the ground, it can start to work into the spine as well. And then you take it into a full twist with the foot rested on the outer thigh or outer knee. And that doesn't always work for people as an actual twist. So if you want to cue a regular spinal twist or even eagle legs, you could do that here. For me, that doesn't loosen up as much. And it is a pretty aggressive twist if you took that. And then into your happy baby. You've got pretty worked up hips here. So we take things back to kind of ground zero by taking legs up the wall. And lets everything kind of settle back in to the middle, into neutral. And any more folds or any more inversions. And I especially like plow pose after back bends because it does release things for me. Shoulder stand does for me as well, but that's not true for everybody. And then you bring it back down slowly. You get that last little bit of ab engagement if you want it. And feet down and into your Shavasana. And again, with the recorded version, I don't let them stay here for very long because you can pause it and kind of set a timer on your own, which is hopefully the goal. But I would talk about what the back feels like against the floor if I were guiding them into and out of this. And that's really it. You can add what you want from this. If you want more information about why I sequence certain things the way that I did, or more breakdowns about how to cue certain poses, which I don't really get into here, please reach out to me. Individually, I can send you a slowed down version or broken down pieces of this with personal instruction for you by request or by order. And you can let me know what is helpful or what isn't, or just general feedback when you can. And if you haven't taken the sequence as a student, I encourage you to do that so you feel it in your body. I don't teach anything that I don't actually do, and I hope that you wouldn't either. And settle into your own space. And give it your own breath. And namaste to you all teachers as well. Thank you for watching.